LP data can be extremely difficult to aggregate and work with in your analytics. I think a lot of people or clients or members in finance that I've talked to generally use Excel as a way to track their data. However, this can become exponentially expansive and difficult to do accurately. And I want to talk about why that is. And this is going to be a very loose video. So I'm going to be going all over the place as it comes to me in my mind. I think it's easier to talk about LP data on the whiteboard, which is why I have it here. And I'm just going to walk through generally what I see in the market and the data that I'm looking at and sort of survey why LPs specifically run into certain troubles when it comes to reporting, aggregating, and getting the analytics of it correct. So the umbrella category here would be that LP data does not come standardized in the market. In other words, if you are a limited partner, your GP or your general partner could send you different formats for that information than, say, another GP would. So, for instance, let's say you are an LP and you are invested into a fund, we'll call it Fund A, and you might get transactions like this would be a return of capital, you would have a capital contribution, you might have net asset value adjustments, you might have dividends, you might have um, expenses, right? And if you're getting just information from one fund, it's not too difficult to record all this and make the necessary accounting information easier and track it all. However, when you start to expand, and I think most of us in finance are working with more than just one fund, you might be working with dozens, if not hundreds, of different funds that you are committed to. Keeping track of all of these different transactions and the and as well as your committed and uncommitted um, capital becomes quite a bit more difficult, especially if you're just gathering it from PDF statements. So I would say that's the first thing, right? Is that most formats for delivery of the information comes in a PDF. And this is totally different than most other securities where, if you were to ask for a transaction list from your bank, um, on the consumer side, you might get a PDF of your statement. But if you are a market maker or if you are someone who's doing some serious trading in the market, likely you can do something other than this, right? You could do a CSV file. Um, there are all sorts of different data types that this would happen, but it would be standardized. Because you're working in a private security arena, um, the general partner sort of has purview on how they're going to deliver this information to you. So mostly what I've seen is that it comes with documents of PDF format. And PDF format is a difficult, of course, way of extracting data out from. There are definitely methods like AI that are making this easier. However, artificial intelligence can still hallucinate, and there's no real validation of that document unless someone is going in and looking at it. And because general partners have a sort of a greater range for identifying and placing value on the way that they deliver you statements, a lot of these transactions will then become have different meanings for different partners. So you could get a very clear like a return of capital from a distribution, but then another general partner might call that something else, might just call it an investment. It's a distribution investment versus a distribution, a true distribution of return of capital. There's investment, there's, um, I'm blanking on all the different names because there are so many that typically when I'm going through it, I just have a list over here that I can say like, okay, when I read this document, it's over here that falls under a distribution, or okay, this subtype falls under a capital contribution, or if it's an expense, it might be this kind of expense. So this sort of leads into my next point, which is if the general partners have different ways of a naming convention for the data that they're sending you, that means that in order to get more granular on it, limited partnerships have subcategories for umbrella categories and their transaction types. This is true also in the net asset value adjustments that you'd make. And this is why it can be another layer of difficulty for tracking the right, or another layer of accuracy difficulty to tracking the transaction movement or the transaction activity for that fund in a given period. And since we're on the subject of different periods, LP could certainly send you something like month to date, or they could do quarter to date. Some do year to date. In fact, a lot of do year to date, and some even do inception to date. And depending on what you get here, I'm sure as the limited partner who's committing capital to the general partner, you have some ability in negotiating how this is delivered to you, but typically you might just get quarter to date or year to date. And so if you're locking your books on a monthly basis, this becomes very difficult. This also means that if you expect something on a month to date, and the general partner decides for whatever reason to switch it to quarter to date, which they could do because they're the general partner, they're sort of the ones who can dictate when the values of your investment are delivered to you, right? As frustrating as that is, that's part of being a limited partner. You're going into partnership with another business, and so you've got to work together in a sense. But there's no standardization as to when something is delivered to the investor as well, because it's private like this. So this is sort of the idea here, where if you are an investor and you are planning on, say, so here's a common, let's walk through a common scenario. I think it's common, maybe it's not super common, but let's say you are the investor here and you are invested in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 LPs. So you're invested in 10 LPs, right? You might have 3 of these guys sending you quarter to date distribution notices, and they would be sending you account statements, capital account statements. You'd be getting your K1s and things like that as well. But really, we're interested in the distribution and account statements for now because those are the ones telling you what kind of transactions you're getting, as well as the net asset value of the LP itself that you're invested in, right? And they have a naming convention that we'll call it naming convention schema 1. And that's for these 3 here. Let's say these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say these 5 here. They send it to you year to date. They also send you distributions and account statements. They send you K1. But let's say these year-to-date guys, let's say that they send it to you in a way. So typically, let's say that these guys, well, let me finish out my first thought and then I'll move on to what I just thought of here. And then they have a naming convention too. And then these last two do month to date. They send you the regular documents, right? The K1s, the distributions, account statements. So maybe they'll send you financial statements as well, all that good stuff. And they have a naming convention 3. Okay. So these guys send you documents at a quarter. These guys do year to date, but we don't really know when they send them. Like the values are for your year to date accounting method, but they might send it to you monthly, they might send it to you quarterly. Some of them even do it semi-annually if they're year to date. So it can be pretty strange with these guys. They're kind of wild because it's year to date. It might be like year to date values for, the month of October or the month of September, right? So you then have to do the calculations of like, okay, let's take the previous amount subtracted from the last amount, and that gives us our new difference value between the two that we're going to put on our book. It becomes now our book value, right? So you do have to do some additional math here sometimes because it's just like piling on top of each other, but they're not telling you like in this period it was this. And then, yeah, anyway, you get what I'm saying. Month to date, right? This is probably the easiest because they send it to you monthly. They send you each document monthly. Everything is just built on top of each other, right? There's a beginning period value, there's your ending balance, you have all the transactions in between, and the breakup between, typically they'll provide you a breakup of, how you came to the amount that's being distributed to you, right? But there's an even greater complexity to all this, right? Let's say these three have their own portals that you as the investor have to go into to grab the documents when they're ready, right? So that's connected to these three. These 5 also have their own portals. 4, 5. And then these 2 don't have portals, but they just do email. So they just email you the account statements and the documents when they're ready. So now you have the aggregation of all your funds that are sitting in 10 different places. And these last 2 aren't even sitting anywhere. They're not uploaded anywhere. There's no investor portal that you can log into and pull the documents from. It's just the general partner sent it to you, to an inbox, to someone's inbox, right? So when we come to talk about aggregation, whoever your aggregator is has to pull the entirety of this into one place for you to look at, right? So you have desperate siloed data areas, lakes, I should say, I guess is the proper term. You have siloed data lakes that are holding the aggregate of your LP investments. And then within those data lakes, there's a, I guess, a time difference, right? A temporal difference between the distribution of those documents within those within those data lakes that they're being updated from. And there's different naming conventions. So once you aggregate it, you have 3 naming conventions that you then need to map to, right? And you even have certain different document types that you need to organize and collect and organize. And so there are a lot of different things that you need to think about. Whereas if you're just going to do, in contrast to say just like your regular vanilla securities like stocks or bonds or something, right? Like your custody bank or your trading provider has a pretty typically there's a pretty solid way of just sending those files, right? In a really digestible way. There certainly has some level of normalization, but it's in a way that is ready for data engineering. This is not ready for data engineering. This is just like each general partner has their own way of doing things, and you just have to sort of figure out how to amalgamate it all into one source and then into one single pane of glass, as we like to say here at Clearwater. But this isn't a Clearwater ad or anything. I'm not sponsored by them to do this, but it's through this work that I'm able to really discuss this. So that's why I bring it up. But yeah. So this is sort of the big thing. There's more to it, obviously, but I'm just drawing on a whiteboard because it helps me think. But the last thing I would bring up is that there is no third-party market comparison that you can do because it's all private, right? And that makes sense. Like syndicated loans or bank loans, right? Um, run into a similar problem. Mortgage loans run into somewhat of a similar problem, I believe, too. But if you can't get anything from Bloomberg or something that's saying like, hey, the data that you're looking at right now as an associate doesn't compare with what other data in the market is saying. So is there a discrepancy here, or is this an instance of further investigation that you need to do? That doesn't come up as much with LPs. So that's sort of the outline for why aggregating LP data is difficult. It's because the general partners, in this sense, don't have a standard way of delivering the information to you. Most of it comes in through PDF. For some reason, that became the standardization, is that most of this information is on a PDF. What's interesting is that the general partner, in some sense, must be using a tool to generate the reporting that it sends to its limited partners. So on some level, like they could most likely just send you an Excel sheet, which would probably be better for parsing than a PDF, because at least if you send in a CSV, you can take your headers and map it more correctly. And so that all just becomes automated, and you don't have to rely on AI to extract the values out of a PDF file, right? Um, so I know it's possible. I know in like most cases, probably like 90% of the general partners out there are using some tool to contain the information of their investments in like a CSV format or in an Excel book of some kind, I bet. I'm sure. There might be other, tables or something that they have on their end as well. But I just don't know why the PDF format became the standard in a sense. Um, and this is always true of like trying to connect to any data provider, is that what we on our side will call something is going to be different from the way someone else on another side calls the same value. And so you need to be able to map header columns together so that everyone knows that we're talking about the same thing, right? And I think unlike other securities that I've seen, there are like sub transactions that are happening within transactions. So like your return of capital transaction will have subcategories to that, as well as your capital contributions. Your expenses are going to have partnership fees versus just a regular operating expense, right? And partners will either include that information, and sometimes they just don't include that information. Some fees are inside of commitment, some are outside of commitment. Some management fees are considered part of the contribution that you have given, and some aren't. So some fees aren't part of the contribution; they're just regular fees that you have to pay um, for to be an owner in that investment. You're getting this data at different times, right? Sometimes you're getting it on a year-to-date value, but you're getting it every month. I've even seen some that are getting it on a year-to-date value, but for whatever reason, they're sending it like weekly. And it's like, well, do I want to record the weekly value at the time that I get it? Or do I just want to record, the closing value for that period, right? If that makes sense. Like I don't need an intra-month value when I really care about the end of month value of it, if that makes sense. And then that delivery of that information varies from quarter to monthly to semi-annually to intra-monthly, right? So it gets real weird sometimes like that. And then there's nothing to compare it to. So even because you're private security, there's no way to flag like, hey, this partner over here got their documents, but this limited partner here didn't get their documents. Um, and that's something that I think will eventually get built out as LP data aggregators become more popular and more LP investors start using data aggregators. I think there will eventually be like a fund master that is tracking when one LP is not getting another document LP. Um, but that brings into all sorts of different considerations, I guess, that one would need to think about as well. But in any case, if you are sort of out there and you're invested in LPs, maybe this video is helpful to you. I know if you look at other videos on my channel, I've been doing a lot of quantitative finance and I've been sort of taking a break because I've sort of been focusing more on my salary work here, but I don't want to let this channel go to the wayside. So I do plan on putting out more advanced content like today for financial professionals out there, but I also intend to make some quantitative videos for the hobbyists as well as some beginner investing, beginner finance videos for people who are interested but are starting at a much lower benchmark level. So thanks everybody. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in another video. Bye.